Well, Happy New Year, everybody. It's 2025. Like, can you believe that? Where's that gone? Welcome to another episode of the Edufuturists podcast. With me and Mr. O, but actually straight away you'll have seen and thought, is it 2025 or is this 2023? Because we've got a very special guest on the podcast today, a returning guest, and it's brilliant to have all the way from Newcastle. He's not in America or Australia or Africa or wherever else he's been around the world. Mr. Daniel Fitzpatrick, how are you, my friend?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's good to be back. And I thought you were saying people are going to think it's 2023 because of how young I look.
No, mate, that is definitely not.
We're not being nice to you. I told Ben not to get you on, so I'm just sitting here annoyed. Like, literally, I said he's dead to us. The door hit him on the way out. Absolutely done. So, no, you do look fresh-faced, mate. You know, the ability to make all that money and spend it on cosmetics is absolutely exceptional. How was the Botox doing for you? Try and do this to us.
That's not what you were saying before we went live.
Try and do this.
Lad, anyway.
Do you think if I was paying for this, it would look like this, man?
Well, I was going to say, I think criminal courts, you can get your money back, mate.
Yeah. It's good. Well, it's good to have you on, mate. Steve, how are you, buddy?
I am fantastic, absolutely fantastic. All good. Busy as always, but Christmas has been a special one. So as always, when you've got two young kids, it's always nice, and you don't mind getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning on Christmas Day. The rest
as
of
long
the
as
year,
it's
kids,
only 5. As long as it's 5.
The rest of the year, stop getting up at 5 o'clock, kids. But for that one day, I'll allow it.
You don't have to get up at 5 a.m. Have you heard of melatonin?
Put it in the whiskey before they go to sleep.
Over here in the UK, I know you keep bringing it back from America on your travels, but it's frowned upon over here, I think.
To be fair, Dan also did offer to get me some ADHD drugs and some marijuana if I needed it. Just saying.
I won't say that, mate. Like, this is going to go out.
I'm only joking. I don't
think we can promote the. We can't promote the book now. I don't know. Literally, we can't. He's not going to be able to share it. What a wasted episode. Like that
never mind. We're here.
And the other episode that we've never talked about when it was in the archives.
It's good to see you, buddy, and it's great to see and follow the work that you're doing. I suppose what would be cool to do before we get talking about the new book that launches today. So it's going out today. So if you are 6th of January, it's going out. So if you listen to this a little bit early because you're subscribed to the newsletter, you're privileged, and it comes out on the 6th of January. So we are going to talk about that and get talking about your new book, Infinite Education. But Dan, tell us a little bit about what you've been up to since you flew the nest, and we've been watching you thriving all around the world. But tell us about what you've been up to.
I'm immensely privileged. I get to work with schools, colleges, universities, businesses, helping them. A few different things. So helping them raise awareness around the benefits of artificial intelligence. Upskill staff, and then also work with their leadership teams on strategizing for a world of ubiquitous AI, I guess, which is what we're kind of heading into, which is kind of the spark for the new book, really, about that around the strategy side of that. But I mean, that's it in a nutshell, really. But I get to work with some amazing organizations. And meet some amazing people and try my best to offer value where I can.
Favorite place? Is there on your travels? Can you pick one? Is there a bit? Whether one maybe just because you visited and you've been to so many that you think, that was an exceptional experience because, like you said, you are lucky. But also maybe for the work that you're doing in that area, whether that's a place, whether that's an organisation, whether that's a country, where you think they just seem to be a little bit ahead nationally or in terms of the work that we're doing around. Correct me if I'm wrong, we are still thinking about strategy in England a little bit different, I think. And maybe you are working differently in the independent space, but I think
it's not. I get asked this question quite a bit, and about is there like one country further ahead than another? Not, and you guys will know this. Like pretty much every education system in the world has the same struggles at the moment. But like bear in mind one or two. I mean, you look at like somewhere like Finland, and it has literally half the amount of teachers who are training every year because they've got so many people who want to train to be teachers. I mean, that's a phenomena. And you go then down to the Netherlands, and they're literally closing schools because they don't have enough teachers. So it's very, very similar pressures. So, and you know that when you're resource strapped, innovation is very, very difficult to do. So, there's a lot of tension out there in terms of the world moving at such a fast pace, but traditional educational systems being even more restricted, and so therefore can't even keep up, and go in reverse really as they look to become more streamlined. So I love. I mean, I suppose it's always been a dream of mine to travel around America. So when I'm like a little kid wherever I go, even if it's like some backwater town somewhere in a random state in America. It's really I love going there. But one of my favorite places is Florida. I absolutely love. Like, I'd never had any expectations. I don't know about you, but growing up in the north of England, like, I never had any desire to go to like Orlando, because I was like, oh, it's just theme park. Why would I want to go there? But yeah, I discovered that it was quite a bit more there, and it's a really cool place. I think if money was no objection, I think I'd move to Florida. It's such a beautiful place.
Really?
Yeah.
Even though their political persuasion?
Well, it isn't. Yeah, that is just interesting.
And now we put you on the spot there, haven't we?
But but the people are amazing. Like, I've noticed. Like, I was able to do some work like actually during the election there as well, and nobody. In fact, I was on the election day. I was sat. I'd just done a session. I was in Oklahoma. I'd just done a session. I came down. I sat like on the seats in between sessions, and there was two guys behind me talking about the election. And I was so shocked. I like turned around and I had to say to them, I think I'd been in America on and off for about 4 weeks by that point, and I was like, you're the first two people I've heard talk about the election. It just seems to be like, I suppose, a bit like what Brexit was like when in the UK at the time, and it still is, I suppose. Like, it's so polarized that in good company, nobody really comes to talk about it because it could
it's like that politics and religion thing, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I found that people in Florida are so friendly. Really, really friendly. I remember like my first ever time there, going through customs, and the customs guy was like so friendly. And I was like, oh, I was expecting something a bit more hardball, and it kind of got better from there, really. So yeah, I love it. Lovely weather. You got Space Coast, so you can go like see rockets go off. You've got lovely beaches. You've got the theme parks as well, which are, now that I've got kids, taking them there was just absolutely amazing. I suppose you enjoy it through them. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I hear that. I know that we all three of us have a mutual love of New York as well, don't we? So like that whole, my experience, I went there in May, and I was just like, everything's bigger in that space. So I can imagine from a Florida perspective.
Can you get a helicopter ride around?
Yeah,
that's pretty cool. I've not done that. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. But why would you need a helicopter ride around New York when you've got one parked in the back garden, right, mate? Obviously, fly that. I'm joking. So obviously, you've talked about there that you get to travel the world. You talk about navigating a world and helping people develop a strategic perspective around, I suppose, education more broadly. And obviously, when we were on the podcast together for it was almost 8 years, wasn't it? Me and you, and then me, you, and Steve for a time. We've been saying what does the future of education look like, right? And that's the whole principle of why we called the podcast what we did. After a name change, and I know you'll remember the good old days of in the studio with the EduTech project. They were the good old days. I found some old graphics the other day, which always make me laugh. But yeah, so we've been having that conversation about future education, and you're like front line on a lot of those conversations all around the world now. So I suppose my question is, what have you kind of shifted in your thinking since our time together in maybe the 12 months or so since we were doing this all day, every day, and week in, week out. What's shifted and that you've seen that's made you think, okay, where's the future of education going?
Not too much, to be fair. I think, I suppose, like you guys, that kind of, there's got to be a better way than this conversation, like runs through my veins, really. And I often like say to people that, like, the work I do is not for AI. It's not because that's not the end of what I do, just because I want people to adopt AI and then I'm done. That's not the point of it. It's like it's kind of a bit of a Trojan horse, the old story of the Trojan horse. It's kind of like, I get invited into schools, colleges, universities, like on like through the AI. But when I'm in there, the conversation is always brought back. I always then bring the conversation back around to, well, how can this help them, and how can we because when I talk about strategy, it's not, I think a lot of people, when they think about the word strategy, like think, oh, well, like a plan for the next 5 years. Like that's when I'm using that word, I'm kind of using it as a way to say, well, how do we lead into the future, really? And kind of taking I know we talked about Vijay Govindarajan quite a bit, and kind of his kind of definition of just as a leadership in the future. It's just how you make sure you're leading, or you're continuing to lead into the future. So it's kind of that, really. So it's kind of working with organizations, educational organizations, to say, well, how do you want to stay leading in your field tomorrow, or how do you want to rise up and be a leader tomorrow? And that's gonna take change. Like, in a world of constant flux, the only thing that's certain is change, isn't it? So it's how do you make sure that you are growing into the future as it comes? And at the minute, and I believe probably for the next few decades, artificial intelligence is going to continue to be more and more part of our lives. It's going to become ubiquitous. It's going to be all around us. It's going to be in everything we do. And I'm sure we'll talk about it in different ways, and it'll adapt, just like the internet did from the mid-90s to, let's say, till to now. It's very, very much a different. We look at it different. We talk about it differently. I'm sure the same will happen. But I think because of how that technology works, which is essentially keep information stored to however you want it, anytime, anywhere, it starts to have an impact on what we're doing in traditional education, because we're still training people to be containers of information, I guess, for want of a better term. And so how is that going to cause a conflict with this technology? I think it is. So how do we get ahead of that and make sure that we are, like, I was reading literally just this morning, I was just adding a few extra bits to the book, and there was a Kingston University, just outside of London, did a big report in 2023 where they surveyed 2,000 business leaders, and 74% of them said that they believe that people in university won't be prepared for a workplace that has AI integrated into it. Like 74%, that's crazy. So what can we do to prepare our students for success, I guess, is the key. And we're going to have to be proactive. We're going to have to do something different, I think, going forward.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting one. And again, we won't go nations and we won't go organisation, I suppose. But how difficult are you finding that, without being specific and narrow in terms of as an overall or an average, if we can draw it to that rather than specific examples and naming anybody? But in a world where endpoint assessment is key for those people that are listening, and I know there's a lot that are listening from the rest of the world and the US, but those in England, actually endpoint assessment exams is a finish line and an identifying a line in the sand at a particular point, and we've agreed and disagreed with lots of different things, and we all believe, I think, still that that's not the right way. But how in a world where that is something, we're actually in the world where when new schools are being built or been redefined and iterated on, they're getting rid of all those community spaces and those different spaces, and everything becomes a square classroom with tables facing the front, and there's a digital whiteboard, and everybody's talked about. Everything's a standardized classroom. Everybody's had standardized curriculum, and then we've got endpoint assessments like that. How do you strategize? How do you work with those organizations to then go, you know what? Actually, let me show you a future that is completely different to that, because I remember when I was in it, and I look back, 2016, the test article, knocking down walls in regards to redesigning a maths curriculum that was about extending learning beyond the classroom, the Martini model I talk about often, like any place, anytime, anywhere, all that kind of stuff. How do you do that with educators and education leaders that are just can't see past that model changing?
It's really like it, and I'm going to say something with my thing. Oh well, what's the point then? But I think it's almost impossible, and I say almost impossible because it's going to take people who, for want of a better term, don't give a shit anymore and want to go right. Let's do it in spite of the system. So I think it's going to be a two-way approach. I think it has to come from the top and it has to come from the bottom. Waiting for the top to get their act together just doesn't make sense, because especially when the education system is so hooked onto the political transitions that we go through. And I've been privileged over the last couple of years to do a bit of work with Department for Education, and they're reactionary. I think all government departments are kind of reactionary. They're not proactive, and probably rightfully so in a way, because how can a government department come out and start recommending ways to go when it doesn't have all the evidence? Things can change really fast. It could get itself in a real corner if it started to do that. So what it needs is people from the bottom up to start presenting viable options. And we know places are doing this. XP School, we've talked about many times. There are kind of pockets of people trying something different that is still within the system, because obviously that's taken to be, but are starting to innovate. And like XP Schools is one that is looking at multidisciplinary projects instead of individual subjects. So it's, I think we need pockets of innovation, and it's really I think when I look at the strategy and when I work on strategy with places, I look at something called speculative design. So speculative design is all around going, right, let's say 10, 15 years time, where do we want to be? And let's say you just pick something. So you go, right, students have a device which will help them learn. What does that look like in 15 years time, do you think? So you do almost like the sci-fi thinking type stuff, and you go, right, well, what is it? How does it help? How does it change their learning? You really, really map it out. And it's just something floating in the air. And then you might prototype it. You might actually create something to represent it. And you get it's built on the design thinking process. And then you go, right, well, if that's say 15 years time, what does that look like in 14 years, or does it look like in 13 years, or does it look like in 12 years? And you get back to, well, what's the step for next year? So it's a reverse engineering process. And so you're not going, right, you run a secondary school in the northeast of England, let's say, you're a good or requires improvement. You literally have to just get students to that exam, get good grades in order to have any credibility in the local area. So you don't have enough staff. It's really difficult. You're not saying to a school like that, right, you need to become the future of education next year. Because obviously that isn't, like the points you pointed out just then, Steve. That's just so unrealistic. It's not going to work. But there are some schools out there who can start to have a bit more freedom, and independent private schools are the obvious one, although they might not have as much freedom the next year with extra costs coming their way in the UK. But there are little pockets where we can start to prove models. I think we need to do that. We need to be working with government as well to think what actually does that work. Is there, because the number one thing behind it has to be evidence as well. So It's really tricky, but the, it's either we do it or we just keep doing the same thing that we've always done.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And I think I'm with you there. Like, and we obviously that conversation around schools like XP, and we've obviously talked to Carl Gombrich from the LIS, London Interdisciplinary School, and lots of like even think about all them years ago when we were talking about EL education, EL and Ron Berger, and some of the stuff that David Price talked to us about. All them people that have been thinking about this experiential project-based learning, and beyond that, not just thinking about that as a curriculum model, but obviously thinking about the system. We had. I remember the conversations originally were, what are the next steps? And interestingly, that you talked about that, and we obviously talked about Danny Miller's formula for change that I know that comes up quite a lot. But we said, I think I remember, I think you actually might have written this on a document somewhere, and we went, this is freaking well good, which was, we're led to believe that the system will evolve over time to meet the needs of learners and the world, but it hasn't. We need a revolution. So the question is, like, do we still need a revolution, or is it evolution steps towards stuff, or can it be both?
Yeah, I think it is both, absolutely. And you probably know where I'm going to go here. So I think there's two main types of innovation that we have to strategize for, and that is, it's the non-linear and the linear. Again, going back to Govinda Rajan's work, in that we need to make what we've already got better. I mean, we just need to, like, for the sake of teachers' mental health, for the sake of students' mental health, we need to do that a bit better, whether it be inject a bit more efficiency into it, a bit more creativity. And in fact, I think the education system does that really well. So, I mean, a lot of the time, sometimes it doesn't, but being able to make the system more efficient, more streamlined, well, he does it really well, to the point where, and by the way, I'm saying it makes things efficiently really well. I'm not making a judgment on whether that's a good thing or not, because I think in a lot of cases it's not. But and probably what we consider, not all of them, but what we consider some of the more high-flying schools in terms of the grades they get, do that really well. I mean, you look at like Michaela School in Wembley in London, and they've got it down to a fine art, like in terms of getting people ready for the exam and getting them good grades, because they've almost got blinkers on where they go, right, that's the most important thing. That's the thing that's going to impact the socio-economic impact for the students is going to be that getting good grades. Now, I don't agree with that, but that's what they indicated that that's what they need to do, and so they make the process. And I suppose it reminds me, it's a bit of a cliche, but and I remember looking this up actually. If you're a consultant, so if you know, like you've got a factory, traditional type of factory, let's say, raw materials come in through one door, goes along a factory belt, things happen to it, and then it goes out the other door as a product. Consultants who go into those types of factories and look at how that can be done more efficiently, they literally, so like for a couple of months worth of work, they'll get paid hundreds of thousands of pounds for that job, because it's such a talented bit of work. Because if you're finding efficiencies, even just to reduce that factory line by 30 seconds, let's say, that could save the company millions and millions of pounds over time. So, and I think that's what we do in education really well. We go, right, and I remember being in secondary schools where we were like, right, kids need to be from the line outside into their seats within 30 seconds. Within another 30 seconds, all the books need to be handed out. And I remember going to CPD sessions where teachers were sharing their practice for how fast they got the books from the box into every student's hand, so that the learning could happen really, really fast. And this was like a pride thing. It was like I remember like I'm sure the head teacher went around and like filmed it and then showed it to us all on a CPD session. And because somebody somewhere once did a study where they said the amount of minutes that a student spends in front of a teacher equates to a higher grade at the end of the day, some big study somewhere. So it was like, right, every second counts. And we did, I'm sure when we did Accrington together, Ben, there was a phrase like that, every second counts. And I remember doing something similar at Accrington where I was like, right, I get my starter activity on a Google Classroom and the kids are doing the starter activity on their iPads while they're lining up to come into the classroom. So by the time they're even in their seat, the starter activity is already done. And so we do that really well.
Just to jump in there,
Yeah.
What we've just talked about, and I know there's two variables and we're going to jump into it, but we've just compared education to improvements in factory settings. So is that a concept? I think we've talked about it long enough, and obviously we know about it, the fact that like marginal gains, look at, like Olympic sport. If you think about, I went to a talk recently and was lucky enough to meet some of the Olympic rowing team. Is this sport?
Oh, yeah. What was that book they wrote?
I can't remember, but it wasn't
It's
about
all
that.
about...
But it was basically this. The whole conversation, the whole presentation was around: does this make the boat faster?
Yeah, I've not
read the book, but literally, it was unbelievable. And literally,
will it make the boat go faster?
Yeah.
So all of that, the production line of putting things on to get it out, all of those is based on a finish line. All of those are a bit where you go, get it out
I
of
see
here.
where you're going here, Steve.
Finish.
This is clever. It's almost like you're thinking about where you're going with this.
But ultimately, it's just bonkers, isn't it? Because ultimately, yes, we can iterate, but it's really, not upsets me. I know the way we are, but we are comparing education and how we're improving learning or just how we're improving bits through an iteration, very much like we would complete a race or we would get something out to market in a box. We're not selling Mars bars and we're not competing a race that finishes at a certain point.
The output is measured the same way. It's all metrics, isn't it?
It is, and that's the issue. And I know you said top level, and this is not a criticism of what you said. I totally agree. We've got a great way of improving those little, but actually, we all believe that education is well beyond that, and is so much more than just getting them to do those bits. Because actually, really, it's not just about passing the test. It's about that holistic education, and so much more than it. How do we challenge that? What is the other type of innovation, and how do we focus on that in terms of the strategy and your book, which ties lovely into it, mate? That that infinite game stuff and everything else.
Yeah. And that is so the book's called Infinite Education, and it builds on the work of James Carse, not Simon Sinek. James Carse on his work around infinite. I'm joking there because I know Simon Sinek wrote about it as well, and his work's based on James Carse. But I went back to James Carse and reread James Carse's work on finite and infinite games. And he's doing it kind of from an academic point of view for businesses, James Carse. So I think a lot of the thoughts in my head, I thought really was succinctly summed up using that phrase. And a lot of the stuff that we've chatted about for years as well, in that and when he talks about infinite and finite games, it's like, God, you couldn't come up with a better example of a finite game than the education system. It's all about that kind of that 3 hours in that hall with a pen and piece of paper. And I know schools like to say to themselves, well, it's not. We don't teach to the test, or we're much more. And I've been in schools where we've said things like that before, working in schools and leadership teams, saying stuff like that. But actually, you can't. I think we're almost fooling ourselves by saying that, because at the end of the day, that is really what matters. And then, like I say, we've convinced ourselves that actually, well, that's probably the best we can do for these students, get them the best grades as they can, and then at least we're giving them something in their hand for the next stage, whatever that might be. Now, it's a very, very reductionist viewpoint of education, isn't it? And I'm not blaming the people who are doing it, because they're kind of forced into that weird area to do that anyway. So I think why don't we rethink this? Why don't we treat education as the infinite game? Which is something you could, again, if you think of the education system, best sums up a finite game. Actually, education as a whole, you couldn't find a better example of an infinite game, like personal education throughout life and self-development. That is what an infinite game is, and I suppose it's going right. Well, I think what we have to do. In fact, I was on a podcast the other day, and they said to me, like, if you had one.
What? You went to another podcast? Rude,
with
that. Like, mate, dead to us. Cut this. Cuts.
That's like being on BBC and mentioning ITV, isn't it? It's like, but the one question they said was, if you had a day where you were in charge of the education system, what would you do in the day? And I think, honestly, what I'd do is go, right, what do we mean by, what's the purpose of education? If we can get that right, if we can really drill down into what we mean by that, then everything would come from that. And I think we've lost that. We've lost, what are we doing it for? And I know you guys, being fans of Simon Sinek, are all about that why as well, but I think it's so important. Like, why are we even doing it? And it seems like the most simple, basic question, but I think we've lost it. In fact, I don't even know if we ever had it, but we certainly don't have it now. And I think if we can, for me anyway, if I can offer a very simple definition, it's to prepare our students for success in life. I think it doesn't need to get all that much more complicated.
No, just to jump on that, it's really interesting that you say that, because one of the conversations I had recently, I was on a panel I'm not being that guy. I was at a panel in Dubai, and we were talking about, and I heard people talking about preparing young people for the workplace, and I just went, stop. Can we just stop saying this? And like people like looking at me, I was like, that's not why we do learning. We don't prepare learn so that you can go and get a job. That's not the outcome. The outcome isn't.
This is the philosophy teacher in me.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, no, it is. But you're right, and I love that you've said that it's like preparing learners for success in life. Like, that includes work, that includes relationships, that includes their own self-development, their own desire to keep learning, and all the things that sit in that. And I love that. I love that the concept and the philosophy and the why has got lost. And so, like, the reason why we teach, if you ask a teacher why they teach, I think deep down most of them would say that, wouldn't they? But actually, the system has created, or not even just the system, the world that we're in, is designed in such a way that we're preparing young people for work, and that we're trying to fit them into a mold so that they pass this exam to get to that next stage.
We're not even doing that. Like,
no, we're not. 50% of people fail, don't they? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like I just said before, like 74% of British business leaders think that students are not going to be prepared. And that's when it just comes to AI. That's not like the wider picture. So I think, I mean, work is a big part of this. Like, I don't know the stats around this, but you spend most of your life at work. You don't, like, or most of your waking life anyway at work.
Yeah, shit, that, isn't it? It's properly shit.
So satisfaction and success within that arena is a really big part. So I can kind of see why people talk about that a lot. But yeah, as you say, like, you could be having all the success you want at work, but then if you get home and things are a bit shit, it drags you down, doesn't it? It's not. There's more to life. So I think that's absolutely right. And I think, so if we would, again, reverse engineer, and if we were to go, right, we want everybody in the school to have a successful life. Let's say, I don't know, even we picked an arbitrary number, let's say by the time they're 35, how could we get everybody in the school to success by 35? What could we do? Imagine just we started brainstorming around that right now. How different it would look to what we actually do. And I think that's the problem. That's the disconnect.
Yeah, it is. And you're saying that there as, like, if we were to reverse engineer and say, what would we like our young people's lives to be? Interestingly, I think what we've built systemically or organisationally has been a a model where the why is economic. I was talking to my grandma, 89 years old she is, and we were talking about, she's like, what have you been doing out in them other countries, Ben? I don't think she speaks like that, but it feels like that's an appropriate grandma voice. But and she was talking to me about it, and we were saying, well, the point of education is to get people. And I was like, it's not economic, grandma. It can't be economic because if we said this millions of times, haven't we? If the point of school is just to babysit so that their parents can go to work, and therefore you're going to just do the things that just tick that along. But if it's actually to prepare them for something different, then we probably need to think about a different learning model, and that kind of comes across in what you're writing about. I know for sure in terms of that infinite learning, as it's not something that has an end game. We've got to create that curiosity and that desire to keep learning. One of the things that you mentioned, which is it's really good to hear this word again, because it feels like I think you'll know when I say it, that when you hear people, we go, oh yeah, we talked about that, and it's not always been front and center, but I think you've put it really prominently in the book. Is that concept around decentralisation, and you were talking there about earlier on about the two different models, i.e. we can tweak at this linear innovation, and then the non-linear innovation is probably going to be something that's a little bit decentralised that allows from top and bottom and side to side changes and movement. I wonder if you maybe could talk about where you see that, and maybe how do we help people to move towards some of that decentralisation?
Yeah, I think what I mean by it in a really basic level is that we're moving into a time, and we have been for the last few years, where the mainstream education is going to have competition. So it's not going to. We're going to start getting educational provision that doesn't come from central government, doesn't follow the rules, and we're seeing that a lot. Was it like 1 in 5 kids in the UK haven't returned to school properly since COVID? And there's more and more educational resources being built for homeschool kids. I live next to an outdoor centre a few miles away near Hadrian's Wall, where one day a week, I think every Wednesday, the whole centre is for homeschool kids. So parents bring their kids and they do activities, they do like forest schooling and stuff like that. There's loads of provision going on and I think we're seeing. Again, I can't remember the details, but when I was researching the book, there was a report by an organisation in Australia where they surveyed parents on their dissatisfaction with mainstream education, and there's a huge dissatisfaction. And then you start to get. And I know we interviewed Leonard a few years ago on the podcast who talked about this, and he talked about how he thought the next $1 trillion or the next Google company could possibly be an educational company because there's such a large gap in the market. And we're starting to see online school, the fastest growing school in the UK at the minute is an online school. We're starting to see other options become available. And I wonder how far that will go and will we get, and it kind of follows the phenomena of other decentralized areas of society, like finance. A lot of movement in healthcare at the minute to go more decentralized. So how is education heading in that direction? It's not particularly going at a really fast rate compared to the whole system, but could that speed up? And I think it could. And what we'll see when it comes to competition, you see prices fall. So we could be in a situation within a few years where alternative forms of education are affordable by a lot of parents, and therefore that could facilitate more dissatisfaction with the mainstream, especially when as we're talking about it, the mainstream education seems to be stuck in a time that isn't now, and new organisations have the agility, have the freedom of start companies in a way to be able to adapt really quickly and to. So when I say decentralization, that's kind of what I mean. And I suppose I don't see it as a bad thing. I see it as a really good thing. I mean, more choices is a really good thing. But we need the mainstream education system to realise this, and maybe it will. I mean, what facilitates innovation in the business world? Well, it comes out of two main things. That comes in down to progress in what the product is they offer. So, yeah, or competition. So somebody coming and doing what you're already doing a bit better. So maybe more decentralized models of education will provide a competition to the mainstream, where I think gives them no choice but to innovate and to rethink. Now, some mornings I get out of the side of the bed where I'm like, yes, come on, we can do this. And it's kind of what I try to do. It's kind of what I dedicate my working days to working mainly with educational systems to try and get them to innovate. But then sometimes I wake up and think, we haven't got a chance in hell. Well, it's just really don't. And that worries me, because then it starts to create a bit of a substandard system and a more of elite system, where it could drive more inequalities in society. If we've got, just basically by the fact that some parents are more clued into what the options are, so therefore and we talk about this a lot with our own kids, don't we? And about knowing different options out there, and the dilemma it puts us in as parents of going, because we work in this field, we're like, do we just go with mainstream? Do we try some new things out? But I think we could be in a position where, almost like an elite few, do have the skills, do have the opportunities, and those who are in the system still, because it's at a subpar rate, could miss out. And that could be exasperated by political systems. You look at what Trump's doing in America at the minute. He's trying to literally get rid of their Department for Education. Like, if we got a populist government again, in an not so distant future, had the same ideals, who were to then put the onus back onto the individual, I don't know, local authorities on maths, and say, right, see to yourself, essentially. I mean, even just something like that could really, really put them in really difficult situations. And I don't mean to be too extreme about this, but about 15 years ago, I spent some time in Kenya, and their education system is essentially, state education system is mud huts. It's very, very basic, because anybody who even has the tiniest bit of money will pay for some other form of education. Now that comes down to very few people, because of the socioeconomic factors in that country. But what it does mean is anybody who's just got a little bit of money to invest in education gets a very different compared to those who don't have any money. And I suppose that's where it could lead, and that's what makes me want to do this work, because I'm like, then we could be letting down a whole chunk of the next generation if we don't get our act together.
Yeah, it's like Dallas. Don't think it's a whole of Texas. Maybe it is Texas, but they're bringing in the voucher system out there. I don't know if you're aware of that. Where, but done for the very their political stances. One, I love Texas, but like Orlando, not sure. But ultimately, the reason why it is polarized and challenging, and I know a lot of educators are leaving the profession because of it, is they're giving different vouchers, whether you're state or whether you're a private school. Right. So private school get more money by the government if you go there. If you go to state, you get less. Well, imagine if we said, actually, you can decide and you get vouchers and you decide where you spend your money. It has to be on education, but you can pick whatever school you go to, whatever type of school. I once asked a question and I said, people say, universities have got it easy. Colleges have got it a little bit easier to us, primary and secondary, because the students have to be there. And I said, and I flipped it and I said, okay, what happens if the students didn't have to be with you and had a choice not to be in your organisation? Would that change it, or would that make it more difficult? Because actually the bar would have to be risen, because some students would go, or parents would go, I ain't having that, not having that quality. I know my vouchers can be better spent elsewhere. Would that raise the bar? by creating a voucher system where you can completely just decide where you select and spend your vouchers on education, and it doesn't have to be the school that's around the corner, and it doesn't have to be the skate school. It can be anywhere. It could be online. It could be anything. Does that change the system? Texas a little bit different, but I'm just thinking about that as you talked about it.
Possibly. I mean, I'd prefer like the Finnish model where they just go, right, we try and make every single school as good as they don't have like a. I remember watching a documentary and they don't have like a right. This school's considered better than that school. It just doesn't exist. Every school is exactly the same in terms of.
2 weeks in Finland in decades ago, just having a look at their system, and then I went to primary, secondary, and spent a week and a half in Aagheli University in regards to their project-based learning and how educators were seen, and the fact that they can do 2-tier, they don't all be forced into exams. Actually, they can work with industry, and I was working at the university with elite athletes. So I was working with some people that had been in the Olympics, in the hockey team, and ski jumping and cross-country skiing and everything else. And they were deciding, going, we haven't gone down the academic route, we're athletes, we're going to work with industry. And I watched their day where they had to present their project with industry. Unbelievable. I think the system is, but the problem is, actually, you know what, some people went, the Finnish model's not that good because look at their exam results. We can't really, the PISA test's gone down. So we can't base it back that. I was like, do you think Finnish model is bothered? Do you think they're bothered about their exams, or do you think they focus on the right things and different things? That's the challenge, isn't it? We're always comparing based on what a definition that isn't our definition of what actually the purpose of education actually is. And it's not exam results. The problem is the people who are trying to improve it are basing the definition on theirs and then judging it against that benchmark. And actually don't improve it because it's based on exam scores.
And it's that finite model again, isn't it? It's going, well, the finite metric says it's not very good, but yeah, and what about the day after that? What about the week after? What about the month after? What happens with your students then? Are they, when they forgot 90% of the information they crammed into their heads for an exam? It's beggars belief, I think, that we find this acceptable, and especially considering that they're just not the skills that are needed. I wrote a bit in the book about how the 4 means of production, and it goes back a few hundred years ago, like the kind of political economic theories behind it. But it kind of talks about how throughout time you've needed different means to create wealth or to create productivity. So it starts with land. So those who had, like, go back to feudal times, those who had land were able to create wealth and productivity just by the very fact that they had land, and they didn't need all that much of a workforce. Really, that wasn't a big factor, and they didn't need any entrepreneurial skills. Probably like minimal. You go through time, you get into the Industrial Revolution, and actually that starts to flip a bit. It becomes about your workforce. So those who had the biggest workforce had the best means of production. Little bit more entrepreneurial skills, little bit less land. You didn't need as much land. You come into our times, and actually it flips again, and the onus now is on the entrepreneurial skills. You don't need land. You could literally be sat in the corner of a Starbucks. You don't need people working for you, especially now with the age of AI. You could literally, Sam Altman said that he reckons within the next few years we'll get the first $1 billion one-person company because they're using these tools. But what you do need is entrepreneurial skills. And so we are still preparing students for the industrial model of going out en masse as a workforce in an entrepreneurial age. We're 300 years behind the times now. And it's beggars belief that we're not. I mean, we talk about this a lot, don't we, just in our own personal lives and our own personal work, about how do we create value? How do we find our value, and how do we then make that into a way that's going to sustain us and maybe create a business around it because we believe what we do. And we've had to learn it for ourselves, haven't we? Like, we share YouTube videos, we share podcasts where we teach in ourselves this stuff. Like, imagine that was something taught in school. Like, how to first of all provide solutions, because that's all at the core of it. That's what entrepreneurship is about. It's how do you find a solution, then how do you communicate it, then how do you actually make money out of it so it's sustainable. Essentially, how do you make it sustainable? Some core skills there that are needed for survival right now, and we're not even approaching them. We see it as like, and I don't know if it's because I say this as a teacher myself, but most teachers have never had to live that life. Most teachers have never started a business, so it's hard to teach about something you don't know about. And it's another thing I advocate for in the book, that maybe we need to start thinking about who teaches our students. Is it? Now, I'm not saying we don't need teachers. Of course, we need teachers, but why can't the community help with our students as well?
Yeah, and it ties back probably to that Cigar to Mitra conversation that he came on the podcast, didn't he? He talked about the 4 teachers, didn't he? That every student in the future is going to need, and that's really like the community being one.
That.
Yeah, community, AI, the student themselves, and the actual adult in the room. And
you can't include it, Dan. That's in our book. That's in Edufuturists book. That's trademarked, mate. Don't even start to nick this and rewrite it. Absolutely not.
But yeah, I'm conscious.
It reminds me as well. It reminds me of Yakov Hecht as well. You know, the city school, like his whole thing of going, right, a student wants to learn dance. Why would I go pay a dance teacher to come be part of the school staff? It doesn't make sense when there's 20 amazing dance teachers in the city. Like, it just doesn't make sense.
100%.
And actually, how can
100%.
the community form and teach our students? Yeah,
no, and I'm conscious of your time, and we always try and finish off our podcast with 3 quick fire, and obviously we're going into a new series.
This is new.
Yeah, this is new, Dan. This is new.
This wouldn't have happened in my day.
Well, let's go. It's been happening for 12 months.
Listening for the last 12 months. Yeah. Look, not a fan, have we?
Yeah. Never mind.
I still probably listen more than you do, Steve.
That's a very good point.
Clearly not. For the last 12 months, we've iterated on this 3 times. This is the 4th time we've gone on to it, and you haven't listened to it once.
So we're going into a new series of quick fire questions. You're the first person to ask these, and they are quick fire. So hopefully these are going to be some little snippets on going out onto social. So I'll start with the first one, then Steve, and then me to finish it off quickly. So what's one outdated educational practice we need to abandon?
We should give them these in advance.
Absolutely not. That's why the quick fire. Get thinking.
Thinking that everything has to be measured through writing. Like, for example, something gets taught, students write it down, and that's how we know if they've understood it or not. Like, for some reason, that became the norm, and it just doesn't, especially in the world of AI, it's not feasible anymore.
Segues into this one. How should we measure learning success beyond grades then?
It'd be amazing if we measured it by happiness, wouldn't it, somehow? And that sounds a bit airy-fairy, but maybe progress. Progress in a way where we go right.
Stick with happiness. We're fine. Just end it. We'll cut that bit out. Progress in happiness.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. And then finally, what one thing would you want our listeners to remember?
The website for my book, Infinite Education.
Well, to be fair, I won't surprise you going that way, mate. None of us are, do it?
There are other ways, and we know this. Like when I was with you guys, we interview people every single week, and you guys still do, who are doing it in other ways. We literally started the podcast to find those people because we knew that deep down we knew there had to be another way, and there are other ways. We might not see it in our local area, but there are better ways to do things, better ways to educate. Yeah.
No, I absolutely love that, and I think it's been. We do this quite a lot when we have guests. We say we could talk for hours, and we absolutely could. We've not even scratched the surface on some of the stuff in the book. We'd love to hear a little bit more about how that's been received in a few months'
Next
time
week.
or whatever else.
I'm free at the same time next week.
No, it's
Are
not
you? Are
travelling.
you free?
Tell
Yeah,
it,
that's the irony.
Yeah, let's get it done. Let's
So
just hit
I'll
all
put all the links in the show notes for where you can grab hold of Dan's book, the website, find out a little bit more what Dan's doing, and keep in contact. And obviously find out about the other books that Dan's written. This is the third one that he's written, and you want to find out about that. So Dan, thanks a lot for coming back on the podcast, and good luck with the book launches and the travel and all the stuff that you're doing, mate.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Join over 30,000 educators at London's Excel in January 2025 at Bet UK. Headlining the arena, we have Stephen Fry, Dan Fitzpatrick, and Rose Luckin, to name just a few. There are 100 hours of CPD accredited sessions, from table talks to tech user labs, and over 600 exhibitors to inspire you with new technology for the new year. Educators, get your free ticket today at uk.betshow.com.